Chapter 6 of Lavender and Old Lace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget. Lavender and Old Lace by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 6 The Garden. Miss Thorne wrote an apology to Winfield and then tore it up, thereby gaining comparative peace of mind, for, with some natures, expression is the main thing, and direction is but secondary. She was not surprised because he did not come; on the contrary, she had rather expected to be left to her own devices for a time. But one afternoon she dressed with unusual care and sat in state in the parlour, vaguely expectant. If he intended to be friendly, it was certainly time for him to come again. Hepsey, passing through the hall, noted the crisp white ribbon at her throat and the bow in her hair. "Are you expectin' company, Miss Thorne?" she asked, innocently. "I am expecting no one," answered Ruth, frigidly. "I am going out." Feeling obliged to make her word good, she took the path which led to Miss Ainslie's. As she entered the gate she had a glimpse of Winfield, sitting by the front window of Mrs. Pendleton's brown house, in such a dejected attitude that she pitied him. She considered the virtuous emotion very praiseworthy, even though it was not deep enough for her to bestow a cheery nod upon the gloomy person across the way. Miss Ainslie was unaffectedly glad to see her, and Ruth sank into an easy chair with something like content. The atmosphere of the place was insensibly soothing, and she instantly felt a subtle change. Miss Ainslie, as always, wore a lavender gown, with real lace at the throat and wrists. Her white hair was waved softly, and on the third finger of her left hand was a ring of Roman gold, set with an amethyst and two large pearls. There was a beautiful serenity about her, evident in every line of her face and figure. Time had dealt gently with her, and except on her queenly head had left no trace of his passing. The delicate scent of the lavender floated from her gown and her laces, almost as if it were a part of her, and brought visions of an old time garden, whose gentle mistress was ever tranquil and content. As she sat there, smiling, she might have been peace grown old. "Miss Ainslie," said Ruth, suddenly, "have you ever had any trouble?" A shadow crossed her face, and then she answered, patiently, "Why, yes, I've had my share." "I don't mean to be personal," Ruth explained. "I was just thinking." "I understand," said the other, gently. Then, after a little, she spoke again. "We all have trouble, dearie it's part of life but I believe that we all share equally in the joy of the world. Allowing for temperament, I mean. Sorrows that would crush some are lightly borne by others, and some have the gift of finding great happiness in little things. Then, too, we never have any more than we can bear nothing that has not been borne before, and bravely at that. There isn't a new sorrow in the world they're all old ones, but we can all find new happiness if we look in the right way." The voice had a full music, instinct with tenderness, and gradually Ruth's troubled spirit was eased. "I don't know what's the matter with me," she said, meditatively, "for I'm not morbid, and I don't have the blues very often, but almost ever since I've been at Aunt Jane's I've been restless and disturbed. I know there's no reason for it, but I can't help it." "Don't you think that it's because you have nothing to do? You've always been so busy, and you aren't used to idleness." "Perhaps so. I miss my work, but at the same time, I haven't sense enough to do it." "Poor child, you're tired too tired to rest." "Yes, I am tired," answered Ruth, the tears of nervous weakness coming into her eyes. "Come out into the garden." Miss Ainslie drew a fleecy shawl over her shoulders and led her guest outdoors. Though she kept pace with the world in many other ways, it was an old fashioned garden, with a sundial and an arbour, and little paths nicely kept that led to the flower beds encircled around them. There were no flowers as yet, except in a bed of wild violets under a bay window, but tiny sprigs of green were everywhere eloquent with the promise, and the lilacs were budded. "That's a snowball bush over there," said Miss Ainslie, "and all that corner of the garden will be full of roses in June. They're old fashioned roses, that I expect you wouldn't care for blush and cinnamon and sweet briar, but I love them all. That long row is half peonies and half bleeding hearts, and I have a bed of columbines under a window on the other side of the house. The mignonette and forget me nots have a place to themselves, for I think they belong together sweetness and memory. There's going to be lady slippers over there," Miss Ainslie went on, "and sweet William. The porch is always covered with morning glories. I think they're beautiful, and in that large bed I've planted poppies, snapdragon and marigolds. This round one is full of larkspur and bachelor's buttons. I have phlox and petunias, too. Did you ever see a petunia seed?" Ruth shook her head. It's the tiniest thing, smaller than a grain of sand. When I plant them, I always wonder how those great feathery petunias are coming out of those little baby seeds, but they come. Over there are things that won't blossom till late asters, tiger lilies, and prince's feather. It's going to be a beautiful garden, dearie. Down by the gate are my sweet herbs and simples marjoram, sweet thyme, rosemary, and lavender. I love the lavender, don't you?" "Yes, I do," replied Ruth, "but I've never seen it growing." "It's a little bush, with lavender flowers that yield honey, and it's all sweet flowers, leaves, and all. I expect you'll laugh at me, but I've planted sunflowers and 4 o'clocks and foxglove." "I won't laugh. I think it's lovely. What do you like best, Miss Ainslie?" "I love them all," she said, with a smile on her lips and her deep, unfathomable eyes fixed upon Ruth, "but I think the lavender comes first. It's so sweet, and then it has associations." She paused in confusion, and Ruth went on quickly. "I think they all have associations, and that's why we love them. I can't bear red geraniums because a cross old woman I knew when I was a child had her yard full of them. And I shall always love the lavender," she added, softly, "because it makes me think of you." Miss Ainslie's cheeks flushed and her eyes shone. "Now we'll go into the house," she said, "and we'll have tea." "I shouldn't stay any longer," murmured Ruth, following her. "I've been here so long now." "'Tisn't long," contradicted Miss Ainslie, sweetly. "It's been only a very few minutes." Every moment the house and its owner took on new beauty and charm. Miss Ainslie spread a napkin of finest damask upon the little mahogany tea table, then brought in a silver teapot of quaint design and 2 cups of Japanese china, dainty to the point of fragility. "Why, Miss Ainslie!" exclaimed Ruth, in surprise, "where did you get Royal Kaga?" Miss Ainslie was bending over the table and the white hand that held the teapot trembled a little. "They were a present from a friend," she answered, in a low voice. "They're beautiful," said Ruth, hurriedly. She had been to many an elaborate affair, which was down on the social calendar as a tea, sometimes as a reporter and often as guest, but she had found no hostess like Miss Ainslie, no china so exquisitely fine, nor any tea like the clear, fragrant amber which was poured into her cup. "It came from China," said Miss Ainslie, feeling the unspoken question. "I had a whole chest of it, but it's almost gone." Ruth was turning her cup and consulting the oracle. "Here's 2 people, a man and a woman, from a great distance, and yes, here's money, too. What is there in yours?" "Nothing, dearie, and besides, it doesn't come true." When Ruth finally aroused herself to go home, the old restlessness, for the moment, was gone. "There's a charm about you," she said, "for I feel as if I could sleep a whole week and never wake at all." "It's the tea," smiled Miss Ainslie, "for I'm a very commonplace body." "You commonplace?" repeated Ruth. "Why, there's nobody like you." They stood at the door a few moments, talking aimlessly, but Ruth was watching Miss Ainslie's face, as the sunset light lay caressingly upon it. "I've had a lovely time," she said, taking another step toward the gate. "So have I. You'll come again, won't you?" The sweet voice was pleading now, and Ruth answered it in her inmost soul. Impulsively she came back, threw her arms around Miss Ainslie's neck and kissed her. "I love you," she said. "Don't you know I do?" The quick tears filled Miss Ainslie's eyes and she smiled through the mist. "Thank you, dearie," she whispered. "It's a long time since any one has kissed me a long time." Ruth turned back at the gate to wave her hand, and even at that distance saw that Miss Ainslie was very pale. Winfield was waiting for her just outside the hedge, but his presence jarred upon her strangely, and her salutation was not cordial. "Is the lady a friend of yours?" he inquired, indifferently. "She is," returned Ruth. "I don't go to see my enemies, do you?" "I don't know whether I do or not," he said, looking at her significantly. Her colour rose, but she replied sharply, "For the sake of peace, let us assume that you do not." "Miss Thorne," he began, as they climbed the hill, "I don't see why you don't apply something cooling to your feverish temper. You have to live with yourself all the time, you know, and occasionally it must be very difficult. A rag, now, wet in cold water, and tied around your neck. Have you ever tried that? It's said to be very good." "I have one on now," she answered, with apparent seriousness, "only you can't see it under my ribbon. It's getting dry, and I think I'd better hurry home to wet it again, don't you?" Winfield laughed joyously. "You'll do," he said. Before they were half up the hill, they were on good terms again. "I don't want to go home, do you?" he asked. "Home? I have no home. I'm only a poor working girl." "Oh, what would this be with music? I can see it now. Ladies and gentlemen, with your kind permission, I will endeavour to give you a little song of my own composition, entitled Why has the working girl no home?" "You haven't my permission, and you're a wretch!"